y'all, come on in and sit down. We're just about to get started. Come find a seat. Plenty of seats here. We'll go ahead and get started because I know that students have other classes they'll be attending in a little while. It is so nice to see you here today. What a joy to have the Vision Series back. This is a program that's so special to East Georgia State College, and I'm just really thrilled that you're here. I would like to start first on behalf of Dr. Schechter, who couldn't be with us this morning. When the Chancellor calls a meeting, well, you got your priorities, but hopefully he'll be able to join us before the program is over. But on behalf of Dr. Schechter and everyone at East Georgia College, welcome to this Vision Series event. It is wonderful to see you here. I'd like to tell you first, my name is Dr. Sandra Sharman, and I am in charge of the Correll Scholars this year. And it's my first year stepping into this particular position, and it has been one for me that has been so important. The students remind me every single week of the treasure that is them and their commitment to higher education and the college. And so I would like to recognize the Correll Scholars. If y'all would just stand real quickly. I'm so proud of y'all. Look at them. Thank you, Corrells. Let me tell you about the Vision Series briefly. This is an initiative that brings programs of intellectual and cultural enrichment to the college and the broader constituency. Since its inception, the Vision Series has hosted outstanding personalities. As you come in the door to this auditorium, you see some of them. President and Mrs. Carter, Cokie Roberts, Maya Angelou, Sherman Alexie, and on and on and on. We are so fortunate to have donors who provide funding for this important initiative. We also sponsor field trips for students, and we've taken students to various places to give them an expanded horizon of life beyond the beautiful and wonderful confines of Southeast Georgia. I would also like to thank others who made this day possible, beginning with Dr. Schechter, who, like I said, is not here but will be here soon. The East Georgia State College Foundation is a very generous group of individuals who are committed to the development of students at this college, and certainly their funding for this has been wonderful. Harley Smith, thank you. Harley, I saw you come in. I haven't laid my eyes on you yet, but Harley did a great job helping us pull important pieces of this together, including publicity. Caitlin Moore also helped us with flyers. You may have seen one of those taped to your door or the door of a school building, and Caitlin always does an excellent job. Amber Hodges and the library staff are hosting a book signing. If you want to get your folks a Christmas present, signed by the author, you'll have an opportunity to do that after the presentation today. Alex and the IT staff, I know you're up in the crow's nest up there. Thank you so much. Everything's working beautifully as always. Dr. Chevalier, I saw you. Our Vice President for Academics is always so supportive and helpful, and I thank you for supporting this. Come on in. And then finally, I would be remiss if I didn't remember the physical plant who keeps the buildings here on campus and parts of the grounds just looking so beautiful. And it's just always exciting to have guests here who admire the beauty of this campus, and it's thanks to the physical plant. All right, let me tell you a little bit about our speaker. We are so excited to welcome local author Kathy Bradley to be the Vision Series speaker today. Ms. Bradley is a lawyer by training and a storyteller by nature. She's been writing from her family farm in Southeast Georgia for over 20 years as both a newspaper columnist and a magazine contributor. She is the author of 2 books, One of her books, Breathing and Walking Around, is the book that the Corel Scholars have been reading this year and will continue to read it into next semester. And the other book is called Wandering Towards Center. And for both of these books, she received Wandering Towards Center, Kathy, correct me if I get this wrong, for which she received the Georgia Author of the Year Awards in 2013 and 2017. Good. She's also received the Will W. Campbell Prize for Creative Nonfiction. Kathy was a finalist for the Forward Indies Book of the Year Award in Essay and was a nominee for the Sigurd Olson Nature Writing Award, and the acronym for that is SANWA. Let me tell you about the book that we've been enjoying so much in the Corel classes. Breathing and Walking Around is not necessarily a memoir, but it's a record of 4 years' worth of her observations of common folks, everyday events, and the natural world. She shares with precision and layer upon layer of sensory image, simple tales that emerge in the end as parables. And truly, we have all noticed that we don't even have to close our minds to envision the stories that she writes. It's as if we're seeing a motion picture. She describes it so beautifully. Beginning at Sandhill, the house she built on her family farm, Bradley takes the reader with her as she walks miles of dirt roads with dogs Lily and Tamar. Alert to the details of rural living, the movement of the seasons, the nearness and unpredictability of wildlife, the sights and sounds otherwise drowned out by 21st century living. The meandering continues down the Atlantic beaches, the shorelines of inland lakes, back roads and interstates, and we are at her shoulder as she, like a paleontologist, uncovers joy in the magic and mystery of the familiar and the brand new. Now a little bit from me. My family lived in Statesboro, Georgia for more than 20 years. And while we lived there, we subscribed to the local paper, the Statesboro Herald. Every week, I looked forward to reading a column that transported me to a time and a place where my mind would find solace. During these years in Statesboro, I would lose both of my parents, and my heart needed a salve that could only be found through beautifully crafted stories. Little did I know that I would one day meet the author who bolstered me and gave my mind a reprieve during these difficult years. So it is with the warmest regard that I welcome Kathy Bradley.
Good morning. Once upon a time, in the beginning, two roads diverged into a yellow wood. There was no possibility of taking a walk that day. The sun did not shine. So nobody was really surprised when it happened, not really, not on the subconscious level where savage things grow. Like the brief, doomed flare of exploding suns that registers dimly on blind men's eyes, the beginning of the horror passed almost unnoticed. It was love at first sight. What you have just heard are the opening lines from 8 well-known pieces of literature. 2 or 3 of them you may even have recognized. From Charlotte Bronte to Stephen King to Robert Frost to Dr. Seuss to God himself, all the really fine writers understand the power of a good opening line. For some of you, this fall is the opening line of the story that is your college experience. For others, it is the opening line of your final lap toward commencement. And for those of us whose own educational experience happened years and years ago, It is the opening line of yet another chapter in a life that has moved at a speed we would never have imagined. My very first class at Wesleyan College was Survey of American Literature, taught by Dr. Leah Strong. The class met on the second floor of Tate Hall, where most of the liberal arts classes were held. The ceilings were tall, the walls plaster, and the dark wooden windows so heavy that when they were opened, which was fairly often because there was no air conditioning in Tate Hall, you could hear the chains creaking in the sashes halfway across campus. It was a beautiful Indian summer day, and the sunshine seemed to move in waves with the breeze that ruffled the leaves of the ginkgo trees that grew outside. My classmates and I, probably 10 or 12 of us, were sitting in the old wooden desk whose tops had been scarred with 50 years of initials and other graffiti. I was sitting there wondering just how long one was supposed to wait for a professor to arrive when a figure came scurrying through the doorway. It was a short, chubby, gray-haired woman wearing granny glasses, black polyester pants, a Hawaiian print shirt, and shoes my father would call brogans. She was carrying under her arm not a briefcase or a textbook or a sheaf of lecture notes, but a motorcycle helmet. She strode determinedly across the front of the room, set her helmet down in the middle of the desk, and then walked around to the front and jumped backward so that she was sitting there with her legs dangling down like a marionette. She looked around the room at us and said, through clenched teeth, because that's the only way she ever talked, "The definition of poetry." And we hurriedly opened our spiral-bound notebooks and got our pencils ready, because that's what good students do. "The definition of poetry," she looked around the room again. "When I was a child, my father used to bring home packages of paper pellets. These pellets were the size of BBs, and when you dropped one of these pellets into a glass of water, it would slowly begin to unfold and unfurl until a few minutes later, the pellet had become a beautiful flower. Each of the pellets was different. Each one produced a uniquely beautiful flower." She looked around the room a third time. "The poem is the pellet, and you are the glass of water." I realized I was staring. I had not written a single word, and all I could think was, "Oh my Lord, I'm going to love college." And I did love college. I loved everything about it, including how much harder I had to study than I had in high school, and all the people whose backgrounds were so different from mine, and especially the wideness of the world to which I was introduced over and over again with each new semester. College grew me in a way that nothing else has, and I can only hope that all of you students, especially the Correll students who have spent time with Breathing and Walking Around, will have that same experience, that college will grow you every single day a little bit more. I want to talk to you today about Breathing and Walking Around and the genre in which it is written, creative nonfiction, also known as narrative nonfiction. Creative nonfiction is a form of storytelling that utilizes the techniques of literature to craft a factually accurate story, often about the writer's own personal life. Like literature, creative nonfiction may use simile and metaphor, imagery and symbolism, flashback and foreshadowing. It can be memoir, travel writing, nature writing, or personal essay. But what it must be is true. So let's talk about truth for a few minutes. I grew up a couple of counties over from where we are today. It was a traditional, for its time, childhood. My stay-at-home mother's primary role was nurturing my younger brother and me, and my father's chief role was making a living and administering discipline. Like I said, traditional. The division of responsibility was not a definitive line, though. In addition to administering the occasional corporal punishment, which parents still did then, my father taught me how to tie my shoes, how to bait my hook, and how to appreciate the distinct geniuses of the Johnnies Cash and Unitas. And my mother, along with warming our tennis shoes on the oven door on cold winter mornings and waiting at the screened door as we hopped off the school bus every afternoon, was diligent to oversee our moral training, particularly in the area of truthfulness. Lying, stretching the truth, or as my father sometimes called it, fudging, was completely unacceptable with regard to even the smallest matter. And my mother's skill at cross-examination would challenge what mine would eventually become with a law degree, and she didn't have one. As a firstborn rule follower, I was rarely the object of her intense questioning, but my younger brother was often subject to inquisition. Mama couldn't find it in herself to accuse him of lying, and so she resorted to that well-known Southern idiom, "Are you telling me a story?" It would be decades later that I came to see the contradiction in that colloquialism, when I came to understand that telling a story is not telling a lie, that the best stories, even if they are made up, if some of the details aren't factual, are always telling the truth. Let me give you an example. My favorite book is The Little Prince. If you haven't read it, you should, even though most people call it a children's book. It is about a little prince who lives on a planet which is big enough only for a couple of volcanoes, 2 baobab trees, and a rose, his rose. When he starts feeling taken for granted by the rose, he begins a journey that takes him to a number of other planets where he meets a number of interesting characters. He eventually makes his way to Earth, where he meets a pilot whose plane has gone down in the desert, and a fox. The story is obviously a fairy tale, a fable, a work of fiction. And I've never read anything truer in my entire life. So let's begin with this question: what is truth? I spent 38 years practicing law, the last 19 of those as a prosecutor. Now, most people, if you ask them what is the job of a prosecutor, they would answer to put people in jail. And while we did a lot of that, the job of the prosecutor is actually to find the truth. Toward that end, the prosecutor's most valuable tool is not a polygraph test or cell phone tracking or any of the wildly fascinating and incredibly expensive tools you see on crime scene investigation shows. The most valuable tool for the prosecutor looking for the truth is the question. Where were you? What did you see? What did you hear? What makes you think that? The only way a person can answer those questions is if he or she was paying attention. So there we have the first step to finding the truth in order to tell it. Pay attention. If you want to write, creative nonfiction especially, you must begin by paying attention. Watching, listening, taking notice, being aware in such a way as to attach importance to what you are seeing, hearing, touching, tasting, smelling, acknowledging your own presence in a sensory world. Let me give you an example by reading something from Breathing and Walking Around. This is from page 227. There is a finite number of full moons in a person's life. Fairly obvious and at the same time startling, the thought came to me Monday night as the light from the cream-colored poker chip in the sky spilled over my shoulder and into my lap, and the miles between me and Sandhill grew fewer. I caught my breath, held it for a moment high in my chest, felt my hands loosen their grip on the steering wheel just slightly as I heard the night whisper, "Pay attention." So I did. What I noticed first was the color of the light itself, not white or yellow like the light of a beam of a light bulb, but luminous blue-green like pool water at night, and not clear and piercing, but diffused as though coming through a scrim. There were no edges to the light, no defined stream. The entire landscape was covered and seemed to shiver under its unmeasurable weight. It was dark. The sun had been down for an hour at least, but the outlines of the houses, the barns, the fences, the billboards were all still clean and straight, like portraiture silhouettes. Turning onto the dirt road, the angle of the light shifted and now came through the back windshield, making me feel more than ever as though I were being stalked. Erratic breaks in the tree canopy turned the moonlight into a strobe, flashing up and down, side to side, the color now reminding me of the black light posters my brother used to have on his bedroom walls. As I pulled into the carport, the moon was straight ahead, no longer stalking, but beckoning. Its light had turned the deck into a castle keep, the stark white deck posts into silver ramparts, the pots of rosemary into miniature turrets. There were none of the usual nighttime sounds coming from the branch. The chill in the air had silenced the crickets, the frogs, the birds. The light had stilled the deer who would wait until later to forage the now empty fields for some last vestige of corn hidden in the trampled over rows. I was as alone as one ever is. As I read those words, I am remembering that night, now nearly 13 years ago, with exquisite clarity. I am remembering the sensation of driving down the highway in a car flooded with moonlight. I am remembering the feeling of epiphany as I considered the fact that one day I would observe my last full moon. The experience changed my life, and it happened only because I was paying attention. Paying attention, of course, is not easy. Not when we spend hours every day staring down at tiny screens at images of someone else's life. Not when we can name the entire roster of a professional sports team, but we can't name the birds that sit on the wires outside our houses. Not when we have bought into the idea that an experience isn't special unless we have paid for it. The lavish vacation that leaves us believing that the feel of the wind in Barbados is infinitely better than the wind in our own backyards. That someone else's name on our clothes make not just them, but us somehow better. That the okra and lima beans featured in an expensive farm-to-table meal are better than those our grandmothers grew in their gardens. I would suggest that if you want to write anything, really, but especially creative nonfiction, you would do well to put down your devices and go outside, preferably alone. Be still, take a deep breath, and look around. That is how you pay attention. But what next? When you've paid attention, when you've seen, heard, felt something so real, so moving, so impossible not to write that you must sit down and turn it into words, you must then find your voice. Voice is the way that a writer expresses his or her personality in what he or she writes. It is a mix of cadence, tone, word choice, point of view, and sentence structure. It is the way in which a writer's personality is revealed and a bond with the reader is formed. It is especially important in creative nonfiction because of the genre's attention to expressing a unique point of view. Before we examine voice, though, let me remind you that even as you figure out your voice, you can't be lazy about the rules of grammar and syntax and punctuation. There is a reason that words have uniform spellings. There is a reason that there are so many verb tenses. There is a reason for the capitalization of proper nouns. And that reason is simple. A good writer invites the reader into a conversation, an intimate exchange of ideas, and that exchange cannot happen if the reader does not understand what the writer is trying to say. An incorrect verb tense, the absence of a capital letter, a misspelled word will break the spell that you, as a writer, are conjuring. It interrupts the flow of that intimate conversation, and it leaves the reader unsettled or, worse, disinterested. It really is as simple as that. So, back to voice. I am never more flattered than when someone who knows me reads something I've written and tells me it sounded just like you. I could hear you talking as I read it. That is voice. But it sort of begs the question, that is, what do I sound like? One weekend many years ago, my best friend and I were coming home from Wesleyan, where we were both in college. Somewhere around the Soperton exit on I-16, she said to me, "You know, the closer you get to home, the thicker your drawl becomes." I was, as most college students are, and I would dare say most of you are, eager to distance myself from the world in which I'd grown up. The world that had, after a couple of years of independence in college education, been replaced by what I thought was a certain sophistication. My friend's remark, I can admit now, embarrassed me. That was before I took a class on Southern women writers, before I decided to major in American Studies and took several classes in American folklore, all of which dismissed the notions I had somehow developed about what stories are worth telling. Reading Flannery O'Connor and Alice Walker enlightened me to the richness of the Southern vernacular. Maya Angelou and Eudora Welty alerted me to the layered meanings of the colloquialisms my family and community used. And the study of speech and linguistics trained me to the cadence and melody of Southern voices, country voices. The voices of the great cloud of witnesses by which I am now surrounded each and every time I sit down to write, the grandparents, the great aunts and uncles, the 40 first cousins, my Sunday school teachers and Girl Scout leaders, the people who cut my grass and deliver my mail. It is their voices, voices I've memorized from the stories they have told, the songs they have sung, the language they have used, that has given me both my voice and the courage to use it. Pay attention, find and use your voice. And finally, be surprised. So much of the writing we are taught to do, book reports, research papers, speeches, requires that we come to a conclusion of some kind. This book was entertaining. My research revealed, I would urge you to, we are taught to outline everything, and the last Roman numeral on all of those outlines must be conclusion. What I have found is that creative nonfiction rarely makes a conclusion. Instead, it makes an offering. This, the writer of creative nonfiction says, is what I realized. This is the experience, is the epiphany I experienced. This is what caused me to lift my fingers from the keyboard and say, wow, I didn't know I knew that. I hope it helps you too, reader. I've always been a little frustrated when I read or hear someone suggest, write what you know. My experience is that it is when I write what I don't know, or more accurately, what I didn't know I knew, that I create something good, something to which the reader will reply in the same manner. I'll give you another example from Breathing and Walking Around, and this is from page 56. At low tide, not on my beach, but another beach, one where the sand is less like confectioner's sugar and more like sandpaper, I went looking for, I thought, shells, but not exactly shells, pieces of shells. In our part of the world, it is a rare occasion that presents a whole, unbroken, unblemished shell on the wet edge of the continent for someone to pick up and tote home. So I walked with my head bent, my eyes scanning the crunchy waterline for interesting fragments, quarters and dimes and nickels, loose change. Not quite as easy to carry as a single bill, but still spendable. Further down the beach, something glinted in the sand. I reached down to pick up a piece of moon shell, smooth as glass, curved like a scythe. It was about the size of my thumbnail. I couldn't decide whether it was pink or brown or something in between. Either way, I thought, and smiled at my own vanity, it would make a pretty lipstick. As I kept walking and scanning the waterline, it appeared that, in an effort to get my attention, the tide had deposited an embarrassment of moonshell pieces. Slivers, slices, chunks, all different, but all recognizable, and all evocative of a full moon shell. Just the night before, I had stood and looked out over the ocean at a full moon. Its reflection in the water pulsed with energy, scattered illumination in all directions, outlined the landscape in softness like a filter on a camera lens. I had watched it and remembered other full moons, other nights standing under a shower of pewter light. I had stared at the pumpkin-colored ball poised in the sky at the exact point where its surface could be fully illuminated by the sun, and thought of the mystery and magic we attribute to something that occurs only once every 29 and a half days. Why, I asked myself, holding the fragile pieces of moonshell in my hand, don't we see mystery and magic in the other days? Why do we reserve the awe and wonder for one night a month? Why do we save things, good china, linen napkins, our deepest emotions, for what we call special occasions? The tide had turned, the roar of the waves had softened, and I could now hear in the rhythm of my footsteps the sound of thousands of shell fragments dissolving beneath my weight, shells becoming sand. Back over the dunes, through the sea oats, I carried my treasures, bits and pieces, parts and fragments, remnants and shards. I carried them with my palms turned up and open, the way I'd been told by a friend that one must carry anything of value. It would be lovely someday to happen upon a seashell, whole and unbroken and unblemished. A pink and white conch, or a tiger-striped chambered nautilus, or a tightly spiraled whelk. But it is better still, I've decided, to look for loveliness in the pieces and parts and fragments that get scattered like crumbs along the shore. Few dawns are heralded by full moons. Few shells survive the wash of the tide unbroken and unblemished. It is the other moons, new and waxing and waning, that usher in most mornings. It is the pieces of shells worn down by the wash of water and broken by the weight of travelers that form the beach. And it is the awe and wonder, the mystery and magic of the everyday that is the currency of our lives. Pay attention, use your voice, be surprised. That is how I would suggest creative nonfiction is written. In closing, I would offer a final word of warning. Writing is not easy. Good writing requires that you wrestle with the words at every stage. It is hard and frightening, and leaves one walking with a limp, forever vulnerable to criticism and misinterpretation. If, though, you have a story to tell, the wrestling and the limping are a small price to pay for the difference you will make in the world. Thank you.
At this point in the program, we've allotted a little bit of time for questions and answers. And so Kathy welcomes you to come to the microphones that are set up for your convenience. Students, don't worry, we're going to have you out of here in plenty of time to make it to your next class. But I think we'd like to take 3 or 4, maybe 5 quick questions from audience members. So please come to the podium and ask your questions. And it looks like we've got one right here. Thank you, Paul.
Hello.
Hi.
Hey, Miss Kathy. My name is Paul Warren, and I'm a business major and Corel Scholar here at East Georgia State College. And my question to you is, what do you want people to gain from reading your book, Breathing and Walking Around?
I want people who read Breathing and Walking Around, and either of my other 2 books, a third one came out this spring, is the idea that things, people, places don't have to be extraordinary in the way that most people define extraordinary to be worth paying attention to. I would hope that every time someone reads something I've written, that they get to the end of it with a new way of reflecting upon their own lives and being able to see their own lives as of value regardless of where they are or what they do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so this is too tall for me. Oh yeah, that's right. Okay. Okay, so hey, Miss Kathy. My name is Madeline Romley. I am a Corel Scholar, and of course, and I'm a liberal arts major. So my question to you is, what inspired you to write this book, Breathing and Walking Around?
I'd always thought of myself as a writer from the time I was in 2nd grade, but I never really had the courage to seek publication. And I got an opportunity through Mercer Press, which is where I went to law school, to submit a manuscript to them. And in doing that, I had to face every bit of my fear and insecurity about what kind of writer I was and what I wanted to be. So when I started putting the book together, it included a number of columns that I had written for the Statesboro Herald. And I had to look at them and decide what brought them together, what was the common theme. And so when I did that, I was able to articulate a little of what I just said in answer to the other question, that the insecurity that I felt about sharing with other people is pretty common, and not just for writers. It is for anyone who engages in anything from being a member of a sports team to performing surgery. The idea is you're always comparing yourself and your life to other people. And if you sit down and examine it and examine the world as it exists on any given day, what you bring to the world is worthy of attention. And that's one of the things I want people to get out of the book, is that if you have something you want to do, if you have a gift you think you want to offer to the world, it's worth trying.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Well, Lily and Tamar, who feature greatly in the first book, have both gone to doggy heaven at this point in time. And but I have another dog named Owen, who has his own Instagram hashtag. Every Wednesday, I post something with the hashtag #OWednesday, and he has quite the following. He is a golden lab that showed up at my back door on Halloween 5 years ago. And I had no intention of getting another dog quite so soon after my Lily had died. But Owen has wormed his way into my heart like most animals do. And he is very much a country dog. He will take to a leash only when he needs to go in the car somewhere. Otherwise, he runs wild. And he has a friend in my brother's dog. Smokey is a German Shepherd. And the two of them together run around the farm like they own the place, which they pretty much do own the place. He is a very sweet dog, and like any pet of anybody I've ever talked to, he teaches me something every day about what it means to be loved unconditionally and to feel perfectly comfortable in who you are. Anybody else? Thank you all for coming and for giving me the opportunity to share with you. I've had a lovely time, and I'm very glad to see your campus and see all of you. Thanks.
As a token of our thanks for coming today, Kathy, we have a gift that we would like to give you. And who was going to run back and get that? There it is, there. And Dr. Durden, are you still here? Dr. Durden, we managed, speaking of Southern female writers, we got Kathy a copy of the book that you recommended. And would you stand up quickly and tell Kathy about this book? It's the In the Bosom of the Lamb. Is that what it's called?
Yeah.
Yes.
Caroline Miller was the first Georgian to win the Pulitzer Prize. And actually, her winning the Pulitzer Prize started publishers searching for other Georgia writers, and they found Gone with the Wind author. Not bad, huh? But if you've never read it, I read it recently. It was published in the 30s. It's one of the best introductions to the life of pioneers in Wiregrass, Georgia, and it's written from a woman's point of view, so it's really kind of an early feminist approach, but it's excellent. I hope you enjoy it.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, thank you so much. Now, the program for those of you who would like to get your book signed or purchase a book is going to move just across the rotunda to the library. If you're not going to participate in that, I want to thank you for coming, and you're free to go. Thank you so much.